Howdy peeps, your friendly neighborhood Monomokos here speaking to you. Lovely June day, and I'll get right to the point talking about Joe Biden here. Creepy Joe Biden. Alright, I kind of almost feel sorry for the guy. He's getting it from all sides. The Democrats are forming their circular firing squad, making sure to take their front runner, and probably the only guy who has a realistic chance of winning the presidency in 2020 out. First of all, Joe is a goofus, and he's a gaffe master deluxe. He's not an evil guy. Okay, he's just your crazy Uncle Joe that shows up at Thanksgiving and talks about something he did, when he was a young man, probably, in the Army, and really it's just grown in the telling. He's usually wrong. He's wrong about everything almost. But, as the cliche states, a stopped clock is right twice in a day. Joe Biden is right about two things and two things only, and he's getting hammered for them. One of them is his stalwart opposition to forced busing back in the 70s. And I'll tell you why. It's not racist. The imposition of forced busing was probably the final nail in the coffin of a viable, sustainable black family and culture. I'll just briefly say this about it. Every city in America had a public school, and every neighborhood usually had a public school. There were varying degrees of, how well kept they were and all that, but they were there. And I remember growing up that most families only had one car, okay? And some didn't have any car and relied on public transportation. But the children went to school at their local public school. And the local public school also served as the nerve center and the cultural center of the area, of that neighborhood. That's where voting took place. That's where the school nurse would give out vaccinations to the families. And the gym was also the auditorium. It was the place where the school plays were done, and sometimes they could be rented out or used for a wedding or a baptism or things like this. That's what they had. Okay? By closing down these historically black schools and forcing the children to get up at 5:30 in the morning so they can have the pleasure of driving 5 miles in a bus to go sit next to white children, was no act of mercy. It destroyed the black community because these working mothers and fathers were not able to walk to the local school to take part in the PTA, parent-teacher organization. I remember my mom, she would walk to the PTA. That's because my dad had the car and he was at work working the evening shift. Okay. Other times I remember my parents walking to my elementary school to vote. It was 3 blocks away from our house. Okay. They had that pleasure, that mercy, so to speak, up until my baby sister started attending school. But that had been closed off to black families. Okay? So Joe was not being a racist for saying that. All right? The other thing, number 2, he talked about working across the aisle, actually on the same aisle, on the same side of the aisle as segregationists like Herman Talmadge of Georgia and John Eastland of Mississippi. Okay? These were ardent segregationists from the Old South, Dixie. Some of them, I believe, had signed the Southern Manifesto back in the 50s. I believe Al Gore Sr. signed it as well. These men were, at the very least, segregationists, and let's be honest, probably racists. I didn't know these men personally. I can't say what's in their hearts. All I can say is that they didn't think that the races should mix in school or wherever. They believed in segregation. Okay. By the way, this is what Louis Farrakhan believes. So anyway, the point is they they had some pretty reprehensible positions regarding race. However, they were pretty progressive Democrats otherwise. They were for Social Security, they were for welfare, they were for all these things. The Tennessee Valley Authority. The FDR's New Deal could not have happened without their support. FDR, canny legislator, canny politician. The guy knew what he was doing. Okay, I don't approve of what he did, but he was a great leader in the sense that he knew how to get things done. He realized that the South was a solidly Democrat, and he used them to get what he wanted done, because he wasn't getting it from Northern Republicans or Midwestern Republicans. So he used Southern senators and congressmen to pass all manner of progressive legislation, which we still have with us today. Anyway, I'm going a little far afield here. Joe rightly spoke about how he could work with men he did not agree with on certain matters. Well, that's politics. I'm sorry. Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, said, if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 things, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12 things, go see a psychiatrist. Politics is the art of the possible. Okay? You do not make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies. That's another cliche. You do not make laws with people you agree with. Okay? You make laws with people you may not agree with, and you reach across the aisle. So I've got to hand it to Joe. He was right on 2 different occasions. Now, is he going to give in on these 2 things that he was right on? Probably. I mean, he's, besides being an avuncular, go along, get along kind of guy, he's got the spine of a jellyfish. I mean, he'll do whatever occasional cortex tells him to do. If she screams and yells and flashes a little leg, he'll change his mind. He did it when Alyssa Milano told him to change his mind on the Hyde Amendment. And he did. It was stupid. Joe, if I could give you some advice, pick a spot, pick a range of issues and say, I'm not going to apologize for these. And you'll probably win the nomination. Hands down. You probably will. Remember what the old horn dog Bill Clinton himself said back in '92. And this was all political theater, but he knew how to play it. There was a rapper called Sister Souljah, and she said something very horrible about white people. Maybe we should kill more white people or something like that. Bill took her to task. And even though he was a liberal and he governed as an uber liberal until Newt Gingrich came knocking, he said, "How dare you speak that way? That is horrible and racist." Now this was political theater. I get it, but it worked. Okay, and Joe, it could work for you. Don't cave every time some little hottie or some uber liberal progressive totalitarian quasi-fascist tells you to. Just hold to your guns. Say, ma'am, this is the way I voted. I'm not ashamed of the way I voted. We got things done. Okay, if you don't like it, don't vote for me. Do that, Joe, and you might win. Pax Vobiscum. Let's try to love one another. Adios.